Neville Goddard told you exactly where this breaks. He said the reason it fails is that it doesn't feel natural to be the person you're imagining. He was right. He just never explained what to do if it never feels natural, no matter how long you sit there. 4 people. None of them ever met. One was a mystic. One is a neuroscientist. One spent 40 years in hospitals. One was a psychiatrist who walked away from all of it. And every single one of them, in their own vocabulary, hands you the same instruction. It has to feel real. Not think real. Feel real. So you did that. You sat down and you tried to feel it. And somewhere in the middle of trying, a quiet thought showed up. I don't think I'm doing this right. I don't think I can feel anything at all. Here's what I want you to consider. That thought wasn't a confession of weak faith. That thought was data. And nobody read it. Read that again. Goddard isn't saying you didn't believe hard enough. He's saying the feeling didn't arrive. He located the failure precisely, in the felt sense. And then the entire tradition that followed him spent 70 years telling you to try harder, which is the one thing he explicitly warned against. His words, effort is fatal. You win by assumption, what you can never win by force, so you tried harder. And trying harder was the wrong direction. And you couldn't have known that, because the instruction and the warning were in the same book, and nobody put them together. And Goddard didn't leave it vague. He told you exactly what it feels like when it's working, which turns out to be the cruelest detail of all. A mood of accomplishment, a feeling of relief. He describes an unmistakable surge of power, and a kind of shock when you open your eyes and the physical world hasn't caught up yet. Look at that list. Every single marker is a feeling, which means the test for whether you did it right is the thing you couldn't do. You had no way to check your work. You'd finish a session with nothing, and the absence of a feeling was read as the absence of faith. He even said that when it lands, you stop wanting the thing. Because you can't be in the state of the wish fulfilled and still be longing for it. So you'd check. Do I still want it? Desperately. Every time. And you'd file that as one more failure. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you the mechanism that stops the feeling from arriving. Then I'm going to show you why, for some people, that channel isn't just blocked. It's been quiet for a very long time. And then I'm going to give you the one practice in this entire field that never required it. This isn't a takedown of Goddard, or of anyone. Their systems work. They're just missing a step at the front. And it's the step you got stuck on. Joe Dispenza came at this from neuroscience, and he found something uncomfortable. Your body has memorized an emotional baseline, and it defends it. It works like this. A thought produces a chemical reaction, which produces a feeling. That feeling tells your brain to generate more thoughts that match it. Do that for enough years, and the feeling becomes a mood. The mood becomes a temperament. The temperament becomes a personality. And at every stage, your body gets more committed to the chemistry of it. Dispenza's estimate is that by the time you're 35, about 95% of who you are runs automatically. Memorized reactions. Programs. So when you sit down and try to feel grateful on purpose, you're a 5% intention pushing against a 95% current. And here's the part I wish someone had told me. When you sit down to do this work, and a voice shows up saying this doesn't feel right, or you're too tired, or you'll never change, that isn't your doubt. That's chemistry defending a set point. Dispenza describes it as the body trying to unseat the rider, and Dispenza means that fairly literally. His argument is that cells bathed in the same stress chemistry for years start adjusting their own receptors. They get less responsive to it. So the system needs a bigger dose to register, more urgency, more worry, more drama, just to feel like something's happening, which explains something you've probably noticed. When you finally sat still, calm didn't feel like peace. It felt like nothing was happening, like the practice was empty. That's not boredom. That's a system calibrated to a much louder signal. You heard that voice, and you called weakness. It was closer to a withdrawal symptom. Now here's the part that almost nobody in this field says out loud. Everything I just described assumes you can feel your own body from the inside. For a lot of people, that isn't true. There's a doctor named Bessel van der Kolk who spent decades with people who'd lived through hard years. And he kept running into the same thing. They'd tell him, "I know I should feel something here. I just don't." Not numb exactly, more like the signal isn't reaching. Their bodies were right there. But the report from the inside wasn't arriving. So he put people in a scanner and looked at the part of the brain that senses your own interior. The part that tells you what's happening in your chest right now, without you having to think about it. In some people, it was almost dark. Not damaged, not missing. Dark. Turned down. And these were people walking around, holding jobs, raising kids, with the interior lights low. And this isn't only visible on a scan. There's a long-running study that followed girls who'd had hard childhoods. When you stress a body, the expected response is a rise in stress hormones. That's what happened in the comparison group. In the girls who'd lived through the hard years, the stress hormones went down. The body had stopped sounding the alarm, not because there was no danger, because the alarm had been ringing so long that the system turned the bell off. And here's what matters most about that. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a decision your body made, a long time ago, and a good one. If feeling everything was unbearable, turning the volume down was the intelligent move. It's the reason you got through. The problem isn't that your body did something wrong. It's that the protection outlived the thing it was protecting you from. It's still running. And now it's standing between you and a practice you're trying very hard to do. But there's a cost, and it's the cruelest detail in this whole story. There's only one dial. The wiring that carries fear is the same wiring that carries delight. So when your body turned down the volume to protect you, it didn't get to be selective. Van der Kolk's phrase is that shutting down filters out the sources of pleasure and joy as well. The walk that should feel good, the meal that should taste like something, the person who should light you up. All of it, turned down together. And now, with that dial turned down, read the instruction again. Feel the wish fulfilled. Generate genuine gratitude. Hold elevated emotion for 10 minutes. You were handed an instruction that assumed a working signal. You didn't have one. And nobody checked. Not one teacher, not one book, not one course you paid for. You weren't bad at this. You were never given the prerequisite. And I want to be careful here. That's not a diagnosis, and I'm not handing you a label. It's a description of something that happens to ordinary people, and it can change back. So what do you actually do? Because every technique I've described needs the thing you can't reach. And this is where the fourth person walks in. David Hawkins was a psychiatrist, and he built his whole method on a move that nobody else in this field makes. Everyone else asks you to add a feeling. Hawkins asks you to subtract one. Goddard, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Dispenza, cultivate elevated emotion. Both of those are additive. You have to manufacture a state that isn't currently there, which is exactly the operation that fails when the channel is quiet. Hawkins says the good state is already in there. You don't build it. You remove what's sitting on top of it. His line is that happiness was in there all along. It just shines through once the clouds move. And this is the part that makes it work for you specifically. He says you don't have to know what you're feeling. You don't have to name it. Labels, he says, are just programs. You only have to notice the tightness, the pressure, the weight in your chest. Notice the raw sensation, don't argue with it, and stay willing to let it go. That's it. That is a door that does not require the thing you couldn't do. Hawkins says there are only 4 things you can do with a feeling, and 3 of them don't work. Suppression pushes it down and the energy stays intact. Expression vents a little pressure, but Hawkins argues venting actually propagates the feeling, gives it more energy, and the rest gets pushed back down anyway. And escape, work, scrolling, a drink, costs more and more energy to maintain, and he says it produces a slow loss of awareness. The 4th thing is just letting it be there without trying to change it. His words, a feeling that isn't resisted will disappear as the energy behind it runs out. And ignore the thoughts that come with it. He calls those endless rationalizations the mind invents to explain the feeling. And notice what's missing from that. There's no step where you name the emotion. No step where you summon a better one. No step where you understand why it's there. Every one of those would have stopped you. What's left is almost embarrassingly simple. Find where it sits in your body. The tightness, the pressure, the heaviness. Stop arguing with it. Stay willing to let it go. And wait. That's the whole practice. That's a low door. And after years of being handed doors you couldn't reach, the handle of low is exactly what you needed. There's one more thing, and it reframes everything you've already tried. The bottom-up work. Breath, movement, physical practice, plain attention to sensation, isn't a lesser substitute for the imaginal work. It comes before it. Restore the signal first, then run the practice. Van der Kolk's whole recommendation is bottom-up. Get people back into inhabiting their own bodies before asking them to do anything sophisticated with their minds. And the channel does come back. The research on yoga and body-based practice shows people regaining the ability to sense themselves from the inside. Not fast, not dramatically, but it moves. So you weren't stuck. You were early. You were attempting step 4 with step 1 still undone. And every teacher you trusted skipped straight to 4. And I want you to notice something about how we got here, because it's the whole reason I do this. Not one of these 4 could have told you this alone. Goddard had the requirement, but no mechanism. Dispenza had the mechanism, but treated the barrier as old psychology. Van der Kolk mapped the barrier precisely, and never once wrote the word manifestation. And Hawkins built the way out without ever explaining why his was the one that stayed reachable. A mystic, a neuroscientist, a doctor, and a psychiatrist. Different centuries, different vocabularies, no knowledge of each other. And they're describing one mechanism from 4 sides. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when several honest people look at the same thing and each report the part they can see. Put the 4 of them in one room and the argument completes itself. Goddard names the requirement. Dispenza explains why the body resists it. Van der Kolk explains why, for some people, the channel it runs on went quiet. And Hawkins offers the one move that never needed the channel to begin with. None of them had the whole picture. Together they do. And what it tells you is this: you were never broken. You were never bad at this. You were asked to play an instrument that had been muted, and nobody, not one teacher, thought to check whether the sound was getting through. The instrument was never the problem. And the sound does come back. So I want to hear from you. When you sit down to do this work and it doesn't land, what does that actually feel like from the inside? Not what you think it should feel like. What's really there? Put it in the comments, because I suspect a lot of people are about to recognize themselves in each other. And if some of this landed harder than you expected, a real person to talk to helps. That's not a failure either. That's the same order of operations. If you want the piece that sits right before this one, that's the video on why manifestations stall. It's the question this one just answered from underneath. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments what you'd like us to cover next. And check out our website, thedeepsynthesis.com, where we go deeper on every topic, plus a free convergence map waiting for you.